During the Middle Ages, witch hunts were common in Europe, and they reached their peak in the 17th century. Witch hunters would do anything to get rid of someone they thought was a witch. So do you want to know deeper about this witchcraft? Stay tuned with History Facts till the end, and yes, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. No one knows for sure how many people were put to death during the witch hunting craze in Europe, but estimates are in the tens of thousands. In some places in Europe, like Germany, most of the accused were women, but in Iceland, most of the witches were men. Pope Innocent VIII's condemnation of witches in 1484 was taken up by the German inquisitor Heinrich Kramer, who in 1486 wrote a book about how to find and deal with witches. There were different ways to tell if someone was a witch, and there were different ways to get them to admit it. What was the first witch trial that happened in Middle Ages? In 1428, the first organized witch hunt in Europe began in the Swiss town of Valais. This witch hunt went on for 8 years, and 367 people died because of it. For someone to be judged guilty, at least 3 neighbors had to say in public that they were a witch. In the Valais witch trials, most of the people who were accused were male peasants. These people were tortured until they said they had met the devil, who supposedly told them to avoid mass and confession in exchange for being able to fly. Others admitted they could kill their neighbors or turn into werewolves. Most of the condemned were burned to death, but a few were also cut off at the head. The people who were killed were tied to a ladder that was put into a fire. As a last act of kindness, the government put bags of gunpowder around the witches' necks to speed up their deaths in the fire. But what was the famous case of the witch hunt? Joan of Arc may have been the most well-known person who was burned at the stake for witchcraft and heresy. Joan was killed, but not during the witch hunting craze. Instead, she was killed because of politics. It was just a quick and easy way to get rid of her. Joan's English captors put her through 15 public and private examinations before putting her on trial in an ecclesiastical court, which found her guilty of heresy. A translation of the documents from her trial said that the poison of heresy had changed her into a member of Satan. Joan was found to have blasphemed against God, so she was burned at the stake in Rouen in 1431. It is said that she died of smoke inhalation before the fires burned her to death. Let me discuss with famous case witch hunt in Bamberg. From 1626 to 1631, one of the largest witch hunts in Europe took place in the German city of Bamberg. Out of the 1,000 people who were found guilty, 900 were burned at the stake. Some were lucky enough to have their heads cut off first. During the Bamberg witch trial, people of all ages, genders, and social classes were killed because they were thought to be witches. In 1626, people asked the local government why witches and wizards were making frosts that killed their crops. Johann Georg Fuchs von Dornheim, the prince bishop, started an investigation. Soon a woman was arrested and said she was to blame for the frost. This was one witch hunt where torture could be used as much as needed to get confessions and even new names out of people. When the accused was tortured, he or she admitted to taking part in the witch's Sabbath, using evil magic and having sexual relations with Satan and his followers. So many people died during this witch hunt that in 1627, a special building called the Witch House was built. At this time, thumbscrews, leg vices, and the strappado were used to torture people into confessing and making accusations. Finally, the husband of a woman named Dorothea Flock, who had been accused of a crime, was able to get away. He went to nearby Nuremberg and told the emperor what had happened. The prince bishop who led the Bamberg witch trials was taken out of power, but not before he had made a lot of money by taking the land of the people he wanted to kill. In 1631, Johann Georg Fuchs von Dornheim was no longer prince bishop, and the Bamberg witch trials came to an end. But the witch hunting craze in Europe did not end. It went on for another 20 years, and the last person put to death in Europe for witchcraft was not put to death until 1782. During the witch hunting craze of early modern Europe, most people who were found guilty of witchcraft were put to death in Germany. According to modern data, 42% of witchcraft trials that ended in death took place there. In Europe, witches were usually burned at the stake. In England and North America, however, witches were usually hung. When did people believe them as witches? Witch hunters of the time said that there were several ways to tell if someone was a witch. Any mark on the skin, like a mole, age spot, or birthmark, was a sign that a person was a witch. People thought that this was a sign of the devil and that the witch used it to feed her familiar, which was a demon that helped the witch do bad things and looked like a cat or a dog. Since most people have some kind of mark on their skin, this was a surefire way for witch hunters to find a witch. Another way to find out who a witch really was to poke them with pins. If they didn't bleed, it was clear that the devil was controlling them. Some shady witch hunters used a pin that could be pulled out, so the accused had no chance of passing this test either. Early on in the witch hunts in Europe, women who were single or old were easy targets. Historians say this was because of patriarchal views. Single women and widows didn't have men to protect them. In the same way, a woman with a short temper or a lot to say was seen as very suspicious. They also went after men and women who could heal with herbal medicine. During the European witch hunts, the swimming of witches was another way to find a witch. The accused person was stripped and thrown into a body of water with a rope around their waist. People thought that those who had been marked by the devil would sink, so if someone floated, they were called a witch. If they fell in, a rope around their waists would pull them out of the water. Sadly, this is how a lot of people drowned. Even though this method was used in Western Europe, it was more common in Eastern Europe. Slavic communities often used water ordeals to get through times of drought. Poland may have held the last official witch trial in 1775. People in the area supposedly started the Dorokow witch trial by asking officials in a nearby village to look into signs of sorcery. It was said that 14 women were arrested because they were accused of using magic to hurt the wife of a local nobleman. After being tortured, 3 of these women died. The other women were burned at the stake. Some historians say that this witch trial was the reason why the Polish government banned torture and witch trials in 1776. When did witch hunts end? There are many ideas about what caused the witch hunting craze in Europe. One is that Catholicism and Protestantism were competing for power. Another is that the Little Ice Age caused widespread crop and livestock losses, which led to sickness and starvation. These witch hunts were made worse by greedy and dishonest witch hunters who knew they could make a lot of money by finding and killing a lot of so-called witches. Historians say that a number of political events, such as the 30 Years' War, led to the witch hunting craze in Europe. These events eventually came to an end, ending a time of political instability. The end of the witch hunts in Europe was also helped by intellectual factors. The Enlightenment encouraged people to think more rationally about witchcraft and reject superstition. Because science had made progress, moles and birthmarks can now be seen as normal parts of the human body. Many European countries finally passed laws that made it illegal to hunt witches. Basically, the fear of witchcraft went down when there was a stable government and economic security. The hunt for witches in Europe were a bad use of local power. In Europe, there were many witch trials that took place under the control of village authorities. That's all for today. We sincerely hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to see more of our incredible videos. You can also watch our other videos that have been specially selected for you. Look forward to seeing you in our next video.